What's up? And we are here with the Immortal Enzo build. The build as Immortal unless you end up dying. But we have a lot of stuff that we want to go ahead and talk about. I brought up some graphs because we're going to talk about some defense as well as resistance and why resistance is important. Some shield specific changes. We have a full run of Death Stalker at the end. And there's going to be a good bit of extra information inside of here. We have timestamps below. So when we posted this build last month, this is our baseline for our good old mods. And this worked out super well if we did not have a reactor. And it still works out super well if we don't have a reactor. It's also fantastic to see that people have been having a good experience with the build, especially on the newer content that wasn't out at the time, Death Stalker. The core of the build revolves around killing our critical hit rate as well as our weak point damage by dropping down the supply firearm enhancer and picking it up. This is our 1. Utilizing enhanced combat suit to give us back our shield. This is our 3. And then using perfect supply to not only give ourselves the damage increase as well as ammo, but give everyone that is inside of the range the same benefits. This is our 4. The big thing about first ability, even though it reads that you get that 29% firearm critical hit rate increase, it is actually much more than that. So you see here we are at 36% for our Enduring Legacy. And then when you hover over here and pick up this buff, you see it to my left, we're at 89.18. That is because that 29% ends up interacting with the critical hit rate that we have on our gun, as well as the critical hit rate that we have inside of our kit from something like the Acrobat set. And now we can press our 4th ability, 98.98%, essentially 99%. Big thing to keep in mind with the buff that you get from putting down the pylons, what I typically call it, or the first ability, is that if you end up reloading, you lose the buff. So in this game, there's a couple different ways that you can actually reload cancel. One is to use your ability. So you see that mag go inside the gun. Another way you can end up utilizing this is by shooting, go for the reload, and you can grapple at the correct time to where it actually, works just like that. You can also roll. Your rotation for this build is use your 3rd ability, your 1st, then your 4th, and just start shooting. Mission cancel. And you just do it again. And so we did all of this with this fantastic burning mechanics reactor that doesn't boost up anything that we're using at all. So when you're looking for a reactor, you're not really caring too much about what the reactor is, but you care about the substats on it. So substats that are going to help you out a lot are going to go ahead and be that skill duration up as well as that skill cooldown. If you do not have the skill extension on, you need that skill cooldown in order to hit that very clean loop. Skill duration up is going to be good for this particular situation. So right here we see that our enhanced combat suit is at 8.8. Big thing to keep in mind for this is that enhanced combat suit, it gives you that additional 6% recovery every 1 second interval, and it doesn't round up or round down. So right here we're at 8.8. If we want to go ahead and get that 9th tick for the additional 6%, we go ahead and swap out skill extension for maximize duration, and that will give us an additional tick, which isn't the craziest thing in the world because we do spam this ability quite a lot, but there are going to be some circumstances where we're going to get an additional boost and might as well get as much as we can out of the setup. So the build is pretty simple in design. We're just spamming our abilities as much as possible. So of course we want that skill cost reduction so that we're able to spam. Then we have as much cooldown as we can potentially get with nimble fingers, MP conversion. Duration ends up helping us keep our buffs up. And then we have multi-talented, which when we use our dimension skill, which is going to be our 3rd ability for this particular situation. You can use the 2nd ability as well. It's a little bit cheaper, but if we use our 3rd ability, our shield is going to be full about 90% of the time. So we utilize this ability in conjunction with multi-talented, which is going to reduce our cooldown by additional 20%, which allows us to get some very, very clean loop again. Then the rest of it is overwhelming shield. We're just stacking shield as well as HP in order to provide us with as much shield as possible. And you can tweak this a little bit. If you feel like you don't need this much, you can adjust it. We'll talk about how this interacts when we get to the component section. Ultimately, the maximized duration ends up being a flexible slot where you can switch some things around. Since you have cooldown in your reactor, you will be able to still loop this as often as you need to. And what we're going to go ahead and do, if we have shot focus, we can place this here. This is a fantastic pick. Amplification control is good because it gives you a little bit of extra skill range as well as some max shield, which is going to help out your effective HP. Now, let's be honest here. If they really wanted to buff, they'd be somewhat by you anyway. This can, of course, help out, but I wouldn't be too concerned about it. Sensory depth would actually make you tankier than what you would get with amplification shield. So the 29878 is our max HP with amplification control on, and then the 192, or that 19.2%, is what we get from our fire resistance with our golden roll right now. So our effective HP is going to be that 36,977.7, and then when we are using sensory depth, with sensory depth, that 13.5% comes after your damage reduction from your defense as well as your resistance. So that is going to look something like this, and that will give you a effective HP of 38,998. So you become about 5% tankier when it comes to the elemental damage when you are running sensory depth. As I'm sure most of us know at this point, is that the debuffs that you get applied from Deathstalker ends up lowering your stats. Some of the stats that are affected are firearm attack, which is big, and then another big one is actually your resistance. So your toxic resistance, I went into here with 10,000. I dropped down to 7k. And so just having the resistance on my component, which was the 3,600, I was down to 700 resistance. Maximize toxic resist is great for the Deathstalker fight. It allows you to stay up, which you don't really need help with inside this build at all. What you do need help with is stopping other people from having a floor POV. So this is going to allow you to res in those dire situations pretty well. This is going to be your best amount of bulk they can get. Now, another option is going to be that perfect anti-venom. Perfect anti-venom works out well because when you are getting hit by those rings, you get those poison procs. Poison procs start to do a pretty decent amount of damage, and then when you are taking damage, you do not regen mana. So that is a good option, kind of a little bit of a middle ground between getting that utility and getting that defense. And the main thing is you need a good external component, ideally, for that perfect anti-venom. So the lava now attacks your shield rather than going through it and making your HP a decimal. And also if you end up going down, you recover with full shield. So there are some big changes to shield that end up buffing them a bit. So I had another version of this build, and it doesn't work because Walker Tyro does not proc with overwhelming shield, and then conditional recharge does not make your HP go down below 1. We can't get to that decimal anymore, unfortunately. So we're going to talk about two different sets, the sets before you're able to beat Deathstalker, and the one that you're going to be able to grab after you start farming them. You're going to go ahead and go for the HP support auxiliary power. This is 646 HP, and this is the only option that you have for that max HP before you end up killing Deathstalker. Max HP for the roll is going to be pretty big. MP recovery out of combat is not too important. It's going to show up a lot more inside the Deathstalker fight, but for most fights, not really that relevant. And then fire resistance, although there are things that deal fire, nothing really deals enough fire damage for you to really need it. For our sensor, we have Volcanic. You can also run the Frostwalker one, or once again, the generic gold, which is going to be the case for all these slots. And this will give you 646. MP recovery in combat as well as max MP are pretty important. These are going to allow you to keep on spamming and have that consistency. If you do not have these components, you're going to run into some situations where you're going to run low on mana, but ideally, of course, you get golds, double golds. As you can see here, I do not have double golds, and I've been pretty A-okay. For our memory, we have defense as well as MP recovery modifier. Of course, more MP is always good. And then we have the Slayer processor here with max HP. Toxin resistance, particularly for this fight, is good. And then we have max shield. Now, the toxin resistance, you can swap this out with shield recovery modifier. Last patch, this did not work, but now this actually does ramp up how much you are recovering when you press your third ability, which is a pretty good buff. Not better than toxin resistance for this fight, though. You definitely want this for the Deathstalker. So after you start farming them, you can go ahead and grab the Invader Auxiliary Power and then the Invader Processor. And both of these are good because they give you that 11.9% max shield, and then the top roll is 646 max HP. And that's what you're looking for all of these pieces if you want to be as bulky as possible. Overwhelming shield sets your max HP at 1 and increases your max HP by 29.8% of your max HP. And so what you can do here is grab this, grab more HP mods such as Stem Accelerant, increase HP, and of course some increased shield like this. And something like Weigh the Scales does not end up giving you more shield than HP conversion. So we're at 27,498. Weigh the Scales, and we're at 24,836. It's back on. And then what we can go ahead and do, we run the HP max components like we mentioned. And if we were to swap this out with something that had shield, we would see a dramatic drop. Now we're down to almost 24,000. So this build, we have 5,495 defense. And now let's go ahead and talk about some of this good old math. So I just want to do a shout out to Eve Urka for go ahead and provide the defense formula. And then we got the Gamer Yokaichi, who are going to use their formula for resist to go ahead and plug in these good old numbers. So this is a tool that you guys will be able to use and be able to kind of filter out builds that you see and also improve them. So you plug in your HP, in this case it's going to be shield. Plug in your defense. We also have a graph that has resistance in it as well. And then once you plug in your defense, you'll be able to see your damage reduction here. And also you'll have your effective HP. So in the first Descendant, some of the boss's attacks are elemental, and some are non-attribute, and some are a combination of the two. So something like the Death Rise Bubble bypasses defense altogether, and that is what you use to reduce the non-elemental damage. And then the elemental damage, of course, you use resistance. And we can see that the non-attribute damage is 2.5 times less than what the elemental damage is. Something to keep in mind with these numbers is that the damage reduction is already baked in. So you see that we have the 10,567 here for the non-attribute, while our fire attribute is much closer this time, is because I added on fire resistance. So this is the damage I actually took from Death Stalker with the maximized resist on. So 7,890 was damage that was reduced by our 33% damage reduction. So we'll go ahead and bring out the good old calculator, and we'll do 1 minus the 33%. Now we got this number right here, and we'll go ahead and divide the 7,890 by this. And we can see the original damage that we ended up taking. These are our numbers without any reduction from defense or fire resistance. So what we're going to go ahead and do is bring in some values that are actually applicable. So we have the Annihilation sensor here that's going to add some extra defense. And then we have increased defense, giving us 160% more defense, putting us at 26,503. We have all the stats right here for the increased defense mod, the maximized fire resistance mod, as well as sensory depth, where we can see that sensory depth is overall better. And to conclude this, what we're going to go ahead and do is just show the damage of the stomps that we are getting from Pyromancer. Like I mentioned earlier, some of these attacks do all elemental damage, some do a mixture, some just do all physical damage, and then there's also going to be a range sometimes for some of these hits. So this is with maximized fire resist. We have 2174, 2072 with sensor depth. For your inversion reinforcement, this can actually give you some pretty big boosts. So you can either go with some extra shield, which of course you don't really need, or you can go with some extra mana, which is always pretty nice. And then when you have this activated, you get that additional 4% damage reduction. So for the third slot, you can go selective neurostimulation or recover maneuver. Both of these are quality. This has a lower cooldown, but I utilize this so that way I'm able to keep my rotations up even more. And then neural focus augmentation works out really well with this because you are gaining more max MP, and then you recover a percentage of that max MP. You're picking up the drops on the ground. That also scales with how much max MP you have, so you'll be able to get more even with those. Hyperdimensional vision is going to be fantastic to cleanse the debuff, and that means you're going to be tankier as well as deal more damage. And then this, of course, can work out pretty quality as well. So one thing to keep in mind, with each hotfix and each patch, some of these numbers are probably going to swap around. Like this, the other day, was down to 15%. The last month, this was at 20%. So for our guns, we have the Enduring Legacy. We have the fire attack on it, the firearm critical hit damage, the bonus firearm attack versus Colossus, and the firearm attack. For general use, I would put the critical hit rate on here instead of the fire attack. But for Enzo specifically, my man is at 98.98% crit rate. So I went ahead and went with fire attack, especially for this boss because the weak point is atrocious on this one. So for the Death Stalker fight, we're opting out of the weak point, so that way we're able to consistently deal great damage. The weak points on the side you can break pretty easily, and also the weak point on the chest you can break pretty easily, but after that it becomes a bit difficult to consistently get those weak point shots in. Sharp Precision Shot works out perfectly with this kit. It allows you to scale up your damage as well as that fire rate, which is going to allow all of your shots to get that amped up damage as long as you have that added duration on. And then Edge and Shot ends up being better than Insight Focus. I know that negative 15% firearm attack seems crazy, but due to how high the critical hit rate as well as the critical hit damage is on the gun, Edge and Shot ends up beating it out, even taking critical resistance into account. So the Tamer The only thing that you're looking for here is weapon change speed, and this is just a little trick that you use. You don't have to use it at all, and neither do you have to use the blue beetle, but both of these things have a use in this build if you feel like you want to add it on. So, Tamer, you can get that weapon change speed, and we're stacking more weapon change speed, and we also get some defense. And then we have general rounds compulsive to lower our movement speed. So, why do we have this? If we go to our Inversion Reinforcement, just get rid of this for now, and we add on Arch Pacemaker. When we are below 300 movement speed, or 300 or less, we get that negative 25% skill cost. Earlier, by earlier I mean the other day, this was down to 15, and this looked absolutely horrible. So once again, check these values and make sure these things are the number that they are in this video, and you might have to adjust a little bit. Trying to give you guys some good old options. But when you swap over to the Tamer, you can see that we have that little foot right there. And now, when we press our abilities, that skill cost is a decent bit less. And it's not hard to swap in between it if we have enough weapon change speed. So something that you can do is just add it to your general rotation. You're shooting. Imagine we reload, swap over, press this, get this down, boom, pick that up, go back to shooting, and get kind of like a flow with it. And then the blue beetle has the special purification. And so if you have somebody that uses singular skills, then you are able to go ahead and remove a debuff. You have a 50% trigger rate to remove the debuff 100% of the time. So 50% of the time, it works 100% of the time. And yeah, and so the singular skills that Enzo has is going to be the first ability and also the fourth. But if you are running multi-talented, you have to micromanage it a little bit. In that case, you can swap off multi-talented and put on something like, passionate sponsor or another quality mod that we talked about a little bit earlier. So one of the mods that nobody uses, and for the most part, people should not use it at all, it is Final Wish. We're going to get that skill cost reduction, and we're going to get that skill power reduction. Since we're not using our fourth ability for damage, and then we are barely using the drone, if ever, this is going to work out well inside the situation. Because now, our skill cost is going to be super duper low. So you hit the enemy, you see that button that we have on the left that looks like a little diamond, and it refreshes whenever it does damage. And you can see how low the skill cost is. It still lasts for a few seconds. And so eventually, your good old fourth ability to come back up, and you just keep on spamming, do whatever you want to do. And it is extremely hard to run out of mana. So when it comes to mobbing, you can put on a good old Peacemaker, then you can put on a Reactor that ends up boosting up the stats. And you can put on as much cooldown as you need to, and as much damage, and then you can add on the new mods to this as well. And the situation pops up where when you're throwing these, you're not dealing a crazy amount of damage. The range is good, but the damage is pretty okay. And you have to go through the polarities and switch some things up and max it out a bit more. While you can just go with a Guardian R4. And shoot the ground and miss. But you go with a Guardian R4 and do more damage for way less investment. So we just have an energy activator in here, no polarity slots. And with this setup right here, we're at 84.5% critical hit rate. And then when you're playing it, you'll have this up. So up to 99.9%. And so it's just much easier to get. You have the infinite ammo already, and it's not too much of a different playstyle. It's not really, unless you find it really fun to throw out the drones, which is cool. You can go with that. But Guardian R4 is my mobbing build. Here are the other mods that you can run on good old Enzo. Now, Focus Fire is kind of odd. You would think that this would be a really good mobbing one, because you get 4 stacks of explosive drone, but they added like a weird delay. And this might be bugged. I'm not sure why that happens. This you're able to keep up pretty easily and scale the damage. But mainly is that drone issue. Reinforced front line. This works out well. This is more so for a HP based build because it gets rid of your enhanced combat suit. Then supply firearm enhanced, of course, that's what we're using. And then supply tactical armor. I think that this has a lot of potential, especially with a gun like the Wave of Light, because it's going to provide your whole team with some damage reduction as well as some movement speed. That is going to wrap up this good old video. Right here we have the 95 million run for the Deathstalker fight. Now this is a great run, not because it's a 95 million damage one, that does help out of course, but because you can tell that my brain is turned off in this run. I'm doing the rotation backwards. Sometimes I'm missing the window and I'm barely paying attention to it and I'm rezzing people, and still we did a great amount of damage and we contributed to the overall fight. And most of all, you guys can do the same thing. You can even do better numbers with the tips that I told you in this video. But yeah, that is all for your boy. If you have any questions, go ahead and let me know. Adios.